Hello, I'm Odell Borg. I'm here to teach you about the cedar flute you just got. The interesting aspect of the flute is that it's a very ancient instrument. The Native Americans had this flute for thousands of years, and like all tribal cultures throughout the world, they really did not have a written music language. And it's important to note that because for you as a beginner player, you don't need to know anything about music or music education or how to read music or know the notes to be able to play this instrument. Now, most of you will either have a 5-hole flute or a 6-hole flute. These flutes are based on a pentatonic scale. We call it a pentatonic scale now. It's been around, it's one of the ancient scales throughout the world. And it's based on 5 notes, penta meaning 5. The magic about this particular scale is that all the notes are completely harmonic with each other. So in other words, no matter what you play, it sounds great. On a 6-hole flute, there is an extra hole, which is the 3rd hole from the top, meaning the mouthpiece, and that note is out of the pentatonic scale, and it has a little bit more of a dissonance to it. It's not quite as melodic. You have to learn how to use it, okay? So in the beginning, I would recommend you keep that hole closed. When I make my flutes, I tend to take a leather strip and I tie it over the 3rd hole from the top to keep it closed until you're ready. Then you take it off, slide it off, and start using that hole. That hole has to be, that particular note comes more from memory. When you start to play it, you go, okay, this note works well with this, and you start to play it that way. When you are using a 5-hole flute, you don't have to use memory. You could just play and have fun with it. Each flute is made in a particular key. The flute that I'm playing today is in the key of A. And your flute, when you look at it, on the back side, on the bottom, will have a slight circle, a small circle, and we'll have a letter in there, A, G, F sharp, and that is the key of the flute that you own. It's not important to you right now, but it may be later on when you play with other instruments or you play with another flute player, and you'll say, well, what flute are you playing? What key is it in? You'll be able to refer to the flute that tells you right on the back what it is. Now, the most important thing about playing the flute, the hardest thing actually, is to make sure all the holes are closed. And the way you achieve that is to use the flat part of your fingers, the meaty part of your finger. And just place the fingers right over the hole and put a slight amount of pressure on it. Avoid using the tip of the fingers because they do not seal the holes as well. So play a little bit more flat-fingered. Okay, how to hold the flute is also important. It doesn't make any difference whether you put your left hand on top or your right hand on top. What is important is the hand that's on top will have to use the 3rd finger, which you use your index finger in the top hole, 2nd finger will go on the 2nd hole, and then the 3rd finger goes on the empty space between the 2nd and 3rd hole on the 5-hole flute. It's a larger space, and I want that finger to rest there. It's important to do that. Because when all the holes are open on the flute, that's the finger that supports the flute, the 2 thumbs on the bottom and that finger. If you don't put it there, you'll figure it out real fast because your flute will have a tendency to fall out of your hand. Now, when you have all the holes closed, here's the sound the flute should make. If one of the holes is just slightly open, this is the sound you'll get. And we're talking about as just a slight opening, okay? So even though it looks like the holes are closed, the slightest gap will create a screechy sound. Now, for the most part, it's very easy to close the holes, except for the last 2 holes, especially the last one at the bottom. That you have to stretch your finger a little bit, and we're not used to doing that, so you might have a little bit of a problem closing it, and you have to stretch that tendon. It'll take a day or 2, but you'll get used to it. Another way of doing that, if you're having problems with getting the holes closed, is get in front of a mirror so you can see which hole is slightly open. The mirror is also important because it allows you to really see what you're doing, because if you look down, you can't see anything anyway. Now, I also recommend on how to place the flute on your mouth, and we call that an embouchure, is to close your mouth, place the flute right against the closed lips, then open your mouth slightly and take the lower lip and cradle it underneath the flute and allow the upper lip to partially close the hole of the flute, the air hole. And then take the lower lip and seal it, okay? Meaning that the lower lip just wraps around the bottom of the flute and seals the opening altogether, I mean the closure of your mouth on the flute. But so your upper lip is controlling the opening. What that will help with later on is the amount of moisture that goes in the flute, which we'll talk about, and what will it really work with is the techniques that we're talking about later on. It'll really will make the techniques of tonguing and fingering much easier. Now I'd like for you to go ahead and practice just playing up and down the scale. Make sure the holds are closed and go up and down. Now that you've learned how to play up and down the scale, what's really important is to play very, very slowly. Play the notes one at a time, close the next hold very deliberately, and play very, very slow. The reason for that is that your fingering will be more precise, and you'll develop a better ear. You'll hear the note, see whether it sounds right or not. Okay? So throughout this, I'm going to be telling you over and over again, please play slow. The speed will come automatically. So just take your time and play slow up and down. Now, what I'm also going to recommend is while you're doing that is to keep your eyes closed. Because if you notice, when you're looking down, you can't see anything. But we tend to do it. It's just the nature of our body to want to see what we're doing. Okay? When you close your eyes, you develop a better tactile sense of how the holds get closed. So it's automatic. And you'll see the flute in your mind's eye, and you'll be able to close the holds much more accurately, much more quickly. The other thing that happens with your eyes closed is you have one sense shut off, which will heighten your sense of hearing. So you develop a better ear. So for the first year, when I first started to play, I just kept my eyes closed. It made a huge difference because later on, when I left my eyes open, I was able to see around me. I was able to enjoy the nature that I was in. I was able to enjoy the people I was with. Because any habit you develop now, it'll stick with you. And it'll be very difficult to break later. So concentrate on developing good habits right now, and you won't have to deal with it later on. So play up and down the scale very slowly until you get bored. What I found is when we get bored with something, that means normally we got it, and we have it wired. So play up and down the scale until you get bored, and then stop and start a new technique, and then we're going to go through right now. As you go up and down the scale, I would like for you to vary the notes a little bit. Play some notes a little bit longer, some a little shorter. Play some in a sequence back and forth, and then just go ahead and vary every aspect of the playing up and down. And I'm going to give you an example of that. So what you did, you played up and down the scale. Some notes you played a little longer, some a little shorter, some you repeated, and some of the sequences you played back and forth. And as you do that, you're going to come across a sequence that goes, wow, I really like that. Okay, so play that sequence that you like over and over until you're bored with it. Go on to another sequence that you like. Play that one over and over again. Put the two together. Play those over and over again. And little by little, you'll start to develop your own song, your own style of play. So it's very important to practice developing the technique of sequencing, playing the note in different styles, playing up and down the scale, but varying everything a little bit, and you'll come up with a sequence that you really like. I'd like for you to go ahead and practice that. Now that you've practiced the sequence of playing up and down, there's one rule I'd like for you to follow, okay? And it's a difficult rule to convey through an audio, but if you can visualize this, the rule is whenever you open up a hole all the holes below it need to be open, okay? So if you want to open up the top hole, make sure all the holes below that are open as well. If you wish to open up the third hole, make sure all the holes below that are open. When you play in that particular style, follow that rule, you are staying within the pentatonic scale. And that means, I don't care what you do, if you follow that rule, you'll always sound great, okay? If you were to go ahead and open up a hole and leave the hole below it closed, now you're out of the pentatonic scale and you're playing flats and sharps. They're legitimate notes, except they sound a little dissonant, and until you're used to it, you're going to say, oh, and that I played something wrong there. It doesn't sound quite right. So until you're bored with the pentatonic scale, stay with that rule. Then after a while say, hey, the heck with Odell. I'm going to do what I want to do, which is fine. But I would like for you to experience the flute in terms of the pentatonic scale so you can feel the harmony of it and the ease of it. So the rule is, whenever you wish to open a hole, make sure everything below that is open as well. Okay? Go ahead and practice that right now. There is an aspect to the flute that is very important, and that is the flute is also a rhythm instrument, not just a melody instrument, but it also has the ability to be a rhythm instrument. And how to generate rhythm in the flute. Up to now, you've been blowing into the flute straight with your breath. Okay? And that's good. That's one technique. Now, another technique is what we call tonguing. And tonguing is very similar to whistling without making the sound. Okay? You're using your tongue slightly, and you're just pulsing your breath. And what it sounds like on the flute is this. Now, anything that you try new on a flute, what I would like for you to concentrate on is always try it on the top 2 or 3 notes. The bottom 2 or 3 notes are the hardest notes to play on any flute because the air has to travel so much further. And it's going to be much more sensitive down there. When you play at the lower part of the flute, everything becomes more sensitive. You have to be much more subtle with all your techniques. So when you're practicing a new technique, practice on the top 2 or 3 notes. Now the tonguing has to do with rhythm in the sense that every song has a rhythm to it. If I were to sing a song by just blowing into the flute and I were to imitate a song, it would be very monotonous. It would sound, I love you. It's very monotone, okay? Now, if I were to sing, I love you, okay, it's got rhythm. Do-do-do, okay? Now, that's the exact same thing you do into the flute. And I'd like you to hear this right now. I'm on the top 2 or 3 notes. What I'm going to do is go ahead and play a little bit of rhythm. Here it is without rhythm. If you hear, now I'm sure you noticed the difference. They're both legitimate ways of playing. It's just that you need to learn how to do both techniques because a song has portions of it that is very soft and smooth, and there are portions of it that have rhythm. And then some rhythm is very, very subtle, so you have to get very, very subtle with your tongue. And some songs are really hard-driving rhythms. So the tonguing becomes an important aspect of it. The other thing it does, it cleans up the note. It makes it a very clear, crisp note. So tonguing becomes a very important part of it. And I'd like for you to practice the tonguing. I'm going to remind you here again to please play slowly. Hold a note for a long time. Listen to the note. See if you like it. Put a little bit more breath in it, a little bit less breath. Really get to using your breath. The reason it's so important is that the true essence of a flute is singing with your breath. In other words, in the beginning, it seems like, gosh, it's all about fingering. Well, it is in the beginning, but that goes away very quickly. You'll be surprised. In a couple of days, your finger will be very automatic, and after about a week, you won't even think about it anymore. You'll just do it. But the true essence of expressing yourself in the flute is about singing with the breath. So the aspect of singing with the breath is emotion and feeling. That's very important. You need to go ahead and develop the idea that when you have your eyes closed and you're playing, see how you feel for the moment. See what mood you're in, okay? And express that mood through the breath, okay? When you're singing, you're in the car and you're listening to a romantic song and you're thinking of someone really close and special to you and you start singing along with it, you have feeling, you have got emotion behind that. Well, it's the same thing with playing an instrument. That's why it's considered singing with your breath. You're putting energy into it. So whatever energy that you have, all the feeling you put in there will come out in the notes. It's very subtle, but it's very real. You'll hear it immediately. So, and it's a very difficult thing to teach because it's difficult to teach someone to express themselves through emotion. But as you do it, if you feel sad, start to play a very sad song. Put a little less air in it. Listen to a sad song. So I had very little energy. I put very little breath into it. I just kind of got in that mood of sadness. If you're happy and joyful, put some energy into it. Express that. The difference is amazing how you'll hear it immediately. And allow the mood that you're in to play the flute. That's what's meant by singing with your breath. There are two ways to affect the flute. Your mouth and your fingering. So in other words, controlling the breath and controlling the notes with your fingering. We talked about the tonguing, which is it is a technique, a mouth technique. It's a control of the breath. But there are lots of different ways to control breath other than just the standard tonguing. For instance, if you were to say the word tuck, 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 tuck. Okay, what it does is an exaggeration of the tonguing. If you trill, rolling your tongue in your mouth, it would sound like this. Now, as you can hear, I'm not the greatest triller in the world because my mouth muscles don't operate the same way. I've known flute players that can trill an entire song. So that brings us to the point that everyone is different. We all have different ways of expressing ourselves, and we have different ways how our mouth and our jaws are built and the way our muscle structure is. So you may be able to do something I could never even think of doing. I remember there was a fellow that sang literally words through the flute while he was playing. I could make out the words. I wasn't able to do that. But for some reason, he was able to control his muscles to be able to do that. I can do things with my mouth and my breath control that others can't. So experiment. Get really creative with it. For instance, flipping the tongue in front of the mouth opening on the flute. It makes it sound like you're fingering very fast. There are so many different ways of generating a different way of letting the air come out and controlling it that it will have a definite effect on the flute and how it sounds. Another way to control the note is through your fingering. What I'd like for you to do is take one of the upper notes and slowly slide the finger off the hole as you play. And it should sound like this. And the key word here is slow. I would like for you to do it very slowly, and we call that bending a note. What it does, it takes the note from one particular note and starts to slowly turn it into another note. It has kind of a bluesy, whiny sound, and it's very effective in songs. Any way that you control the finger over that particular hole is going to change the sound. It can be very, very subtle. For instance, if I start to close the hole very, very slowly and barely leave it open a little bit, again, it generates that whiny sound, but it's a different quality. So experiment a lot with your fingers, sliding the finger off the flute, just going ahead and trilling the finger real fast. Anything you can do, be creative. There is no right or wrong. There's no rule of thumb here. It's just a matter of doing it and having fun with it. Just remember, the more creative you are, the more you'll find out your individuality in terms of playing the flute. Get a little crazy with it, because there are just so many different ways of affecting the sound, and everyone is unique. I've played with hundreds of flute players, and every single one of them is different. Their technique is different, the style is different. Find your own style, and this is one way of doing it. A question that comes up very frequently is vibrato. How do you get that flutter in the note? And it sounds very similar to this. And vibrato is not an easy thing to teach. I've always had difficulty coming up with words to describe it. And a friend of mine finally came up with a technique. And he was a voice coach. And the way to do that is take your hand in front of your mouth and go ho, 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 ho. It's not so much saying the word ho, but it's more using the breath to generate that sound. Ho, 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 ho. Now take your other hand and put it over your diaphragm. And while you're doing that, ho, 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 and you'll notice that your diaphragm is moving back and forth. The vibrato comes from the diaphragm. It does not come from the throat, or doesn't come from moving the flute back and forth real fast. It really comes from the bottom of your diaphragm. And in the beginning, when you first try it, it'll be kind of harsh. It'll be a little bit overly exaggerated, but that's okay. That's the beginning. And you'll be amazed how quickly it'll get more subtle and more subtle. And one of these days, you're going to play and you're going to go, wow, I did it. That's great. You've got it. So it's just it's a technique that becomes more subtle over time. But what I'd like for you to do is to practice it. And take the flute, put it in your mouth, and literally go ahead and generate that sound. Okay, and again, remember, it's going to sound a little bit harsh. It'll be a little exaggerated, but it's okay. You've got to start somewhere, and it'll develop over a very short period of time. You'll get it. The more subtle it is, and the more you do it, the more subtle it becomes. We get a lot of questions about how to take care of a flute. What I suggest is that the most harmful thing to a flute is ultraviolet light, sunlight, in other words. If you're going to have it in your home on a stand, which is a great idea because the more it's out, the more you'll play it. But don't put it in a window, put it in some place where it gets mostly shade throughout the day. And then when you do take it out, put it in a bag. I make flute bags. You can certainly buy them. You can make them if you sew, friends of yours that sew, an old sock, anything like that. But to protect the flute from the sun really helps. And the other aspect to that is maybe oiling it every once in a while. If you keep it protected all the time, you very rarely have to oil it. But if you're going to oil it, use an oil that's non-toxic and something that you don't mind putting your mouth on. There's an oil out there called a salad bowl oil, and I found it in several hardware stores. And what it is, it's an oil they use for wooden salad bowls or wooden dishes. Any oils that will not go rancid. Most of your natural oils tend to go rancid. So use oils that are non-toxic and will not go rancid. And the aspect of oiling that's important is oil the bore, in other words, the large chamber all the way down, and also in the chamber of the mouthpiece. That's where you get the most amount of moisture in the mouthpiece. So oil that and leave the oil in there. If you swab it in there, just leave it and let it dry by itself. Speaking of moisture buildup comes from your breath. Your breath, as it comes out into the flute, it has moisture in the breath, and the moisture will condense, and you'll get a certain amount of moisture buildup. If you play for 30, 40 minutes, all of a sudden the flute will sound like it doesn't want to play anymore. It's clogged up. The best way to handle that is take your finger and cover the fipple hole, the rectangular hole in front of the fetish, the little bird, covered about halfway, and blow real hard into the flute, and you'll see little droplets come out. And then you can also take the flute and just shake it on the rug. I shouldn't say the rug. My friend, I did that the other day, and they said, don't ever do that in my house. So shake it outside because you get all the moisture out. But the moisture buildup, all wind instruments have that. It's just the nature of the thing, and because your breath does generate condensation. Now, the armature that we were talking about earlier in terms of how to place the flute on your mouth and closing the mouth end with part of your upper lip, that will help not getting a lot of moisture in there. So do practice getting that armature. Another thing that a lot of people ask me about is the fetish. The most important, the fetish meaning the little bird that's on top, the most important aspect to that is that it's got to be tied down very, very tight, really snug, very tight. If you can move it with your hand, it's not tight enough. You really need to snug it down because the air that goes through the bird, it's a functional piece, is under pressure. And if you have any leaks, and if it's not tied down real tight, it'll have leaks all around it, and it will not get enough air going down the bore. And at the bottom note will not sound great. It'll break to the high octave very easily. So make sure it's tied down very snug, and the positioning of it should be centered in front of the rectangular hole called the fipple, and it should never cover any part of that hole. It should be just a hair back of that hole, and I mean like a hair, just barely in back of it, but never covering the hole. While we're at it, all this information is in the manual. There's a little booklet that comes with the audio or CD teaching cassette. So please read the manual. All the information is there. If you're anything like me, I get a box, a new product of some kind, and I get it out, take it out, plug it in, and I want to start using it right away. And I look at the manual about 2 months later and go, oh my gosh, you could do all those things. So I don't blame you for that. You're excited. You want to start using the flute, but don't lose the manual. Read it. And a lot of the information that may not, the fingering charts, for instance, may not make a lot of sense to you right away, but it will a couple of months from now. Because the more you play, the more knowledge you'll gain, and the more curious you'll be what else you can do, and you'll want to refer back to that. So please read the manual. A lot of your questions will be in that, and it'll be a valuable tool for you. The flute this particular flute is such a wonderful instrument in terms of the fun you'll have with it. Take it with you wherever you go. Take it on walks and hikes. Full moon in your backyard, it sounds wonderful. Into a canyon. It's an instrument that's really designed to be out in nature, to be played outside. If you play it in the tile bathroom, you'll sound like just a concert flautist because it's just phenomenal. I've played in underground parking garages. It's not a fun place to hang out, but boy, the sound is phenomenal. So take it with you, make it a part of your life, and you'll be amazed what it'll give back to you. I have some songs I put together. They're going to be following this instruction, and the songs are in different keys. The keys will be noted on the cover of the tape or CD. And again, as we said earlier, the key of your flute is marked on the bottom and the back in a circle. And just play that particular song, play along with it. You don't have to play the exact same notes, but just get the idea, the rhythm of it. And the more you play with it, the more you'll get the idea of how to create a song and how to get the different rhythm. And that's what these songs are for. I recorded them very slowly, and you'll be able to follow along very easily. So play lots and have fun, and thanks.